Joe Rogan said something recently on his podcast that Trump has now responded to angrily, as I'll show you. First, you need to see what Rogan said, which is him, as it was described. This doesn't seem to be accurate, but it was described as Rogan endorsing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for president. A disastrous thing to do. But then Rogan comes out and says, no, Trump is awesome too, which is even worse, and seems very discombobulated. Trump still, because of the positive things that Rogan said about RFK Jr. and it going around that he was being supportive of him, is upset. And I'll show you that. But first, here is Rogan on his podcast saying RFK Jr. is the only authentic, honest guy.
That's just what they do. That's politics. They do it on the left. They do it on the right. They gaslight you. They manipulate you. They promote narratives. And the only one who's not doing that is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
You a fan?
Yeah, I am a fan. Yeah, he's the only one that makes sense to me. He's the only one that he doesn't attack people. He attacks actions and ideas, but he's much more reasonable and intelligent. I mean, the guy was an environmental attorney and cleaned up the East River. I mean, he's a legitimate guy. You know, before anybody started calling him an anti-vaxxer, which I thought he was too. I thought he was this nut, this like conspiracy theorist nut, until I read his book. I read The Real Anthony Fauci, and I'm like, what is it? How much of this is real? Because if it's all real, this is fucking insane, and we live in a world where we're being manipulated by these health organizations that are being...
Yes, and just like we've gone through a flashback to an example with so many things, when you speak on public health matters, you discuss vaccine-related things. You've admitted, and he'll later on admit in a post I'll show you, that you're not credible speaking on politics, so stop saying that stuff. Wow, everything in his book. Yes, his book is going to be presented in a very compelling way. True. Because it's from his perspective. But when you compare that to the data, to the facts of a given subject that he's talking about, it's not actually going to line up. But it bothers me, before getting to Trump's response, this thing that has gone around a lot. Luckily, a lot of the people I knew who were interested in RFK Jr. now having Kamala Harris as an option instead of Biden has shifted them back to thinking they're going to vote for the Democratic ticket, because a lot of it was just wanting something different and younger and more fresh and stuff like that. And that box is checked for them with Vice President Harris, which is why we're seeing RFK Jr.'s campaign, at least in polling, slow down a lot, and it's making less of an impact. But we do see some of these MAGA adjacent people like Rogan and others expressing interest in Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in a way that I think for us could be beneficial, where more people who might have voted for Trump will end up voting for RFK. I'm fine with that, because that could siphon away votes from Trump and help the Harris campaign. But there's a lot of false premises that people operate with about RFK, thinking that he's a straight down the middle type of guy. He just is very reasonable on things, and we've done deeper dives and reviewed more specific moments in past segments on him. Obviously, the conspiracy theorist nut thing that Rogan referenced, that is a accurate perception, and that should make you question his critical thinking skills if he's bought into these really disturbing and inaccurate theories, not to mention the anti-vax stuff that gets people hurt. We talked about after the vaccine was rolled out, COVID-19 specifically, it got up to double, twice the rate Republicans dying compared to Democrats from COVID, because a lot of Republicans weren't taking the vaccine because of a lot of this misinformation out there. And so these things matter, and it's not harmless, and it's really unacceptable. And then the idea that he doesn't attack people, he just attacks ideas. He's so much more kind and compassionate. What? RFK Jr. tried to make the case that both sides were threats to democracy. That's a smear of all smears when you can't actually back it up like we constantly do when it comes to the threat that MAGA poses to democracy. With the Biden administration, he blatantly lies about, for example, the Secret Service related things with the Biden administration. He told a whole false story about Biden purposely trying to get him hurt when that wasn't the case. And there's all sorts of unfair attacks coming from that world. So I think Rogan, again, is misled. And interestingly, let's first look at Trump, and then I'll show you what Rogan said, because Rogan said this is not an endorsement of him. But Trump said, it will be interesting to see how loudly Joe Rogan gets booed the next time he enters the UFC ring, MAGA 2024. So Trump's excited about the prospect of Rogan being booed by pro-Trump UFC fans because he said something positive about RFK. But then Rogan comes out and says, for the record, this is not an endorsement. This is me saying that I like RFK Jr. as a person, and I really appreciate the way he discusses things with civility and intelligence. I think we could use more of that in this world. I also think Trump raising his fist and saying fight after getting shot is one of the most American effing things of all time. I'm not the guy to get political information from. If you want that from a comic, go to Dave Smith. He actually knows what he's talking about. So this line right here is something Rogan says constantly. I'm not the guy to get political information from. Oh, I'm not the guy to get medical information from. I'm not the guy who you need to be getting information about a subject that I'm talking about from. And so my request has always been, or I guess my question has always been, why do you insist on often authoritatively speaking on these things then? We just talked about his analysis of Vice President Harris, spreading different theories about her. I've known personally a bunch of people who go, I just heard somewhere that blank. I heard somewhere that this thing about the vaccine, or this thing about Biden, or this thing about some state. Often conspiracy theories about what blue states are doing, and they're taking kids away if you won't give them a trans surgery. That's one theory I heard. They take your kid away if you won't do it, and they give them a surgery anyways. Just bogus stuff. But I've heard so many people say, oh, I just heard this somewhere, and it's really concerning, and it's why I'm against some of these Democratic policies. Where'd you get it? And you dive deep. Oh, it's Rogan's podcast. That's where you got it. That's where you heard it. And what's so aggravating is that while Rogan will justify his own misinformation, will justify when he messes up brutally on facts or espouses what could be dangerous rhetoric about a subject like medical subjects by saying, oh, well, I'm not the guy. I've told my audience, don't listen to me. Yeah, but they do, because that's how having a platform like this works. People do trust you, and they do take this stuff seriously. And so maybe until you're informed enough on an issue, that's not something you talk about. You have the right to. No one's coming after freedom of speech. Totally, you have the right to. But maybe you can make a choice to be more mindful of what you speak authoritatively on and what you don't. What you assert as if it's the truth when you are willing to admit you don't have the information to know if it is, and what you don't. And just as a reminder of the types of things that Rogan can very quickly be bought into believing, and then you would think he would say what you're about to watch and go, I have no idea if this is the case, but that's not what he does. He'll later say that when he's saying, I'm not the guy you should come to for important information, when he's justifying his own irresponsible actions. But in the moment, he doesn't give that caveat. And he very authoritatively, confidently claims things like what we reviewed already in a past segment, this. 63% of our watch time in the last 28 days has come from people who aren't subscribed. If all of you who aren't yet subscribed can click that subscribe button, it would make all the difference. I appreciate it. Back to the video.
But the State of the Union was not live. And
yes, it was.
No. Did you see that they found out that it wasn't? That they looked at his watch. And his watch was...
no.
Yeah. Do a State of the Union analysis, Biden's watch.
No way.
Yeah, someone zoomed in on his watch, and his watch was the wrong time.
How could that even be?
Well, it could be he's blind. You can't see what
but
time his
all the
fucking
networks
watch
on
is.
it?
I don't know what they knew. How do you know what they knew? You just you get a feed. You know?
I don't think all the Republicans would agree to it, too.
who
'Cause they're
knows
all
what
there.
they knew?
So because we already went through this whole thing, I did a whole segment about it. I won't play the whole thing, but he goes on to be told, and he finally realizes this is not true. Luckily, whoever he's sitting with is able to realize this. There's no way this is true, and then they realize it was completely debunked and just nonsense floating around. And Rogan, I guess to his credit on that, admits that to be the case. But so many things are just asserted and they move on. The person he's sitting with doesn't realize, and they just keep going. And so it's so aggravating every time I see that same sentence or a sentence like, I'm not the guy to get political information from. But you're always giving it, and millions of people are receiving it. So maybe you take it more seriously. But on this, interesting to see Trump now turning on Rogan, which for us is good. Maybe a little within the right wing, some division where a lack of unity could end up helping us in November so that we can unite around progress and what I see to be very unifying principles. And that's the unfortunate thing. When he talks about wanting a more compassionate environment, if you watch the speeches from Harris and Walz recently, you look at their policy priorities, these are unifying things if there weren't so many lies being told about them. Let me know what you thought of all that in the comments. If you want to get extra content daily, you can do so by clicking the join button below. And if you want to contribute to the Harris campaign, you can do that by clicking the link in the description of this video.